I'm here in Houston, and the last couple of weeks that I've been home back to Houston from Mexico have just been really crazy for me after spending 2.5 months in Mexico where there was no mandatory mask orders, where there was no lockdowns, where there's just completely different world, basically, to come back here to Houston as Houston and Texas are starting to open up. And then, of course, there's, oh no, things are starting to escalate. You know, the cases are on the rise. Some people are saying Houston is about to be the next epicenter of the country and it's apocalyptic. You know, it's a humanitarian crisis. I've heard all these words thrown around, and I would say very loosely and rather dangerously in recent days about the situation in Houston. So I'm going to go through a couple of stories in Houston. First, I'm going to show you guys what they're saying, and then we're going to talk about some of the facts and things that don't seem to add up. We're also going to talk about masks today because, you know, mainly when I've been talking about masks, I've stuck to my personal view that as an anarchist, the government should never get involved. The government should never be mandating, threatening to fine businesses or individuals if they don't comply. I don't care. I'm sorry, guys, pandemic or not, I don't agree with it. I will not shift or budge on my principles. So I've mainly been sticking with that kind of approach. Also, I do want to say, friends, I know some of you are very harsh to people who wear masks, and that's fine. But I know people who wear masks for various reasons, and they're not necessarily sheeple. They're not delusional or scared necessarily. Many of them think they're doing so, or they say they're doing so out of compassion, and I tend to believe them. They are doing what they believe is the most compassionate act, and that's fine. But I think what I've been trying to drive home is that if the data isn't correct, and if the virus or the pandemic, I know some of you think there's no virus at all, but I'm going to set you guys aside for a moment and say that if this is not as bad as we've been told, then we have to kind of step back and say, wait, shouldn't we then question everything that they're putting us through right now? Shouldn't we step back and say, well, then is this mask order necessary? Are these business shutdowns necessary? Is disrupting the economy necessary? Because, you know, some folks, when they hear that, when you talk about the economy, like, oh, you care more about money than lives. I just think people are economic illiterates, and they don't understand that what is going on with the economy and the repercussions that we are going to see now and in the coming months and years are going to kill way more people than this virus will. And that's just the reality. As people lose their jobs, lose their life, lose their living, you know, everything that they depend on, end up more in the streets. Like, we're going to see all those repercussions. So let me just show you this that I came across. Mayor Turner, who is the mayor that I ran against when I ran for mayor, says he is considering a board of shame to identify businesses violating capacity guidelines. I mean, this is just the height of statism and authoritarianism to me. Mayor Sylvester Turner said Wednesday he is considering a board of shame to identify local businesses, bars, and clubs that are violating the coronavirus health guidelines and the Harris County mask order. He says Houston police departments and fire departments will monitor businesses to determine if they are complying with occupancy limits and requiring customers and employees to wear masks. Some businesses have already lost their alcohol license this week. However, the city said they will not put anybody in jail for failing to comply. So you just face a fine of $1,000. And again, if you've been out of work or your business has been shut down for a couple of months, $1,000 fine could be the end of your business altogether. You know, so it's a very real thing. And they want people to feel that weight. Like, they want them to know, like, we're going to fine you. It's a threat. That's how the government operates. So he continues and he says, the confidence of the customer will determine the viability of the business. We want people to be good partners and good citizens. If you are not, you need to go on the board of shame. So Houston has a total of 16,000 cases. Now, guys, I'm going to go through some numbers, and I know it's easy to get lost in the numbers and the math and everything, but just Houston, the greater Houston area, has 4.5, probably 5 million when you really expand some of the, you know, the suburbs around Houston that are starting to become their own cities. But even the inner city is 2.5 million people. So they're saying the city's total cases. Now, if this is wrong, you guys, you know, blame it on Channel 2 Houston, because they're saying right here that Houston's health officials announced 987 new cases on Wednesday. Now, 987 new cases, we got to remember, that doesn't mean people are like on their deathbed, they're about to die. It just means 987 people apparently tested positive for COVID. And that's if you even trust the test, which I don't. And that brings the total to 16,000 new cases, 16,000 total cases. So think about that. 2.5 million people, 16,000 cases. I mean, somebody do the math real quick and tell me what low of percentage that is, because we know that the overall average, as we're going to show, the infection fatality rate is something like 0.5, 0.6%, maybe even lower. And Turner did admit, now it's interesting, this is how the news works. They don't really make things clear for people to take it in and understand. But think about this. He said more than 90% of the cases that were announced on Wednesday, these cases, these 987 new cases for the total of 16,000 cases, stem back to tests that were conducted between June 14th and June 22nd. So this is from a couple of weeks ago, people who were tested, and now they're just kind of adding the new numbers. So there's a new spike because of tests from a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, that makes sense, right? That doesn't mean there aren't going to be even more cases on, the current period, but I'm just saying, think about that. These are tests from 2 weeks ago that are just now starting to come back, the 22nd, right? So maybe some of them are 4 days old, but it's not like, I don't know. I hope I've made my point. The city also announced 7 new deaths, bringing the total to 204. Again, 204 people have died, and I'm so sorry that has happened, and I hope that their families are okay, and, we can talk about that. But 204 people out of 2.5 million people, maybe 4.5 million people in the greater Houston area. I mean, it's freaking crazy. So Turner basically goes on here to say that, that he might have to do things that people, might not agree with the authority he has. Let me show you the authority. He says, we are going to find a way to get on top of the situation, even if that means, depending on what I see, to push the envelope and assume the authority that some say I don't have. What the hell does that even mean? He's going to assume authority that some say he doesn't have. What kind of authority does he think he needs that doesn't have? I mean, these are the really kind of crazy things that we need to think about. And you don't have to be in Houston to be concerned about this, because I want you guys to go back to February and March when this whole thing started. And I reported on this in Houston, and I called the city of Houston to try to get more information. They acted like I was crazy. But all of the mayors around the country, and then eventually the states, have issued emergency orders, right? And in Houston, the city council voted. There was only one council member that tried to stop it. The city council basically voted to give the mayor indefinite emergency powers. So indefinite emergency powers. You understand that? And of course, it's a government, and it's a government edict. So it's very vague. They don't really explain, well, what are these powers? It says he can do whatever is necessary in the interest of public health. I guarantee you guys, if this shit progresses, that means they will try to implement this same thing, and says businesses will be fined if they don't get their customers to show proof of vaccination. They might not literally come into our homes and hold us down and vaccinate us, but they will make it difficult to operate without, having your immunity passport or digital certificate or whatever. And so is this the kind of authority that Mayor Turner here in Houston wants? Because he said he's going to push the envelope and take authority that some people think he shouldn't have. So we're going to continue the conversation on Texas here. This is a list of the Texas counties that have enacted mask orders, and it includes Harris County, where I'm at here in Houston. But there's a list of people who are so far just recommended. And I think some of this has changed as Texas is starting to, we're being told it's being overwhelmed with cases. Now, just let's get on down here. And it's interesting. This is, again, another example of how the mainstream media works, right? Scroll down to the very bottom of the article. Oh, and this last line, all in all, there have been 2,000 deaths in Texas. Okay, so we'll go back over here. How many deaths in Houston? So there's 16,000 cases in Houston. There's a total of, where's the deaths? 204 deaths in Houston. 204 deaths in Houston. 2,100 deaths. And let's just be generous and imagine and say that there were more people that came up dead related to COVID. Of course, we have to add the caveat that we know that the CDC guidelines have told hospitals that they should write down COVID on the birth certificate if somebody is suspected to have had COVID-19, or if they died with it, but not necessarily from it. And, of course, the mainstream said that's just a right-wing talking point, but you can go to the CDC website and see it for yourself. So even if we trust their 2,100 deaths were actually from COVID-19, and let's just be generous and say the numbers went up, it's 2,500 deaths in Texas. And as of Wednesday, there's 204. We'll throw another 100 on there. I'm not trying to throw a bunch of deaths on there, but let's just be generous with this and give the establishment the benefit of the doubt. There's 300 deaths in Houston, let's say. There's 2,500 deaths in Texas as of today. And again, I'm raising those numbers. But even those numbers, 2,500 in the entire state of Texas. Like I said, Houston has 2.5 to 4 million people in Houston alone. Then you got Dallas, another major city. You got Austin, you got San Antonio. You got other cities that are smaller. And there's been 2,000 deaths. So everything that is taking place right now, and I get it, like people are like, better safe than sorry, right? I'm not trying to sit here, we should just do nothing necessarily. But as we're about to get further into, we're going to see that the numbers aren't really quite what they've been telling us. And again, I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you're just tuning in, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network. We're focusing on Houston and Texas for these first couple stories. And then we're going to kind of broaden the scope and talk about what's going on with coronavirus elsewhere. And then I promise you, I've got a couple of stories that are not related to coronavirus, but there's just so much to cover right now. And I know we're all sick of hearing about it, but we have to dissect this information. We have to push back against the propaganda. And even the people who are well-meaning and who are compassionate and who are believing the mainstream story, we have to show them that there is more than what we're being told. So that brings me to my next Houston related story. So you have people like Dr. Peter Hotez, who some of you may know. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's a very vocal vaccine advocate. He's the professor and dean of Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston. And he goes on CNN. He's been on MSNBC, basically making doomsday predictions, saying that Houston is about to hit the fan, that, we're about to run out of ICU beds and it's apocalyptic and all this stuff. And then today, the leaders of Houston's 4 largest hospitals say that capacity is in good shape as coronavirus cases increase. The CEOs of Houston Methodist. So for those who don't know, Houston has a giant medical center. We have probably more hospitals than any other city in the country, if not, the North America. I don't know for certain, but I know that Houston is just hospitals everywhere. But the CEOs of the biggest hospitals, Houston Methodist, Memorial Hermann Health System, St. Luke's Health, and Texas Children's, held a virtual news conference aimed at reassuring the public that the systems are ready to handle whatever that may come. Recently, it says numbers by the Texas Medical Center showed that 97% of intensive care beds were occupied and that they were on track to exceed 100%. Like they were saying, like, today we're going to hit 100%. Like, oh my God, they've been having everybody freak out. And so Dr. Mark Bloom of Houston Methodist said that the numbers don't tell the full story. He said just that the number is being misinterpreted. And quite frankly, we're concerned that there is a level of alarm in the community that is unwarranted right now. So they go on to say that they do think cases are increasing and they think Houstonians should do everything they can to flatten the curve. But Dr. David Callender of Memorial Hermann says we have plenty of capacity. And this is Lena Hidalgo, who issued the mask order. The CEOs said they have sustained surge protection plan in place, meaning other beds and other rooms could be used to house patients if become necessary. And this is their live stream. I'm going to post this link. I highly, highly recommend. I listened to just a little bit of it earlier. I haven't got to listen to the whole thing. But guys, listen to what these guys are saying. Now, you could argue, okay, well, they're the CEOs of the hospitals and they don't want to look bad. So they're going to fill us with a bunch of BS to try to tell us that everything's okay. But I mean, don't you think if things were about to get bad, that these guys, instead of trying to paper over it and make it sound good, they would say, we are really at capacity. We need some help. Please take care of yourself. But instead, in this talk, they basically cast doubt on that whole doomsday scenario. Now, again, they recommend masks and social distancing and all those things. But at the end of the day, the 4 CEOs of the largest hospitals in Houston are saying there's some misinformation going around. There's, people are being told these stories when it's not exactly accurate. So just to put this all into context, Mayor Turner is calling for board of shame for businesses who violate mask orders and saying he's going to push the envelope and take more authority. Counties across Texas are starting to mandate masks while the death count, and I know it's not just death, right, guys? I know somebody's like, Derrick, it doesn't just about death. And I agree. There are studies that have shown people getting lung scarring, kidneys. There was even one, and I don't know if it's still current. Somebody said it got taken back, talking about affecting testosterone in men. So the point is, there's a lot that we don't know about this, right? Even if you survive, doesn't mean you're okay. But there are people who've gotten it or been told they had it, and they really were like, I had it and I didn't notice anything. Now, that's obviously, it depends on the person. There's a lot of factors. How about we talk about personal responsibility? How about we talk about people who eat like shit and live like shit and don't get exercise? I'm not trying to shame anybody, but I'm just saying you are responsible for your own life. You are responsible for your own health. You make your own personal decisions, and you should stop trying to make the world deal with your decisions. So, we all have to accept that. So mask orders are being put in place. Mayors threatening board of shame and to take more power. And we're being told the hospitals are at full capacity, but meanwhile, the CEOs are saying otherwise. So, I mean, that's just some of the information coming out of Houston.